Classic cars, hot or cold? We'll find out this week on Motoring 97.
TSN's Motoring 97 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will. And Midas, for new, longer-lasting performance friction carbon metallic brake pads.
Each week on Motoring, we try and present to you a good variety of vehicles. And if judging by a lot of the feedback we get from you, the viewer, we can never show you too many classic cars. So with that in mind, we're going to give this week's program a bit of a classic car feel. And we're going to begin by looking at the classic car industry, the restoration business. Is it a healthy business or not? And we did meet a couple of gentlemen who have both seen the best and the worst of times. We're back at M&G Vintage Car Restoration, and with me is the owner of this business, Mike Lewis. Now, Mike, this was the scene almost 10 years ago when Motoring 88 featured M&G Vintage Restoration, and where we first met Mike Lewis. Business was good back then for Mike. It wasn't unusual for him to be working on cars worth millions of dollars. But in the 90s, business took a turn for the worse, and today Mike is in partnership with his former apprentice, Paul Grove.
We were working through the 90s, through the bad times in the economy. Come to 1994, things were that slow that I decided that I'd have to close my shop in Mississauga. And talking to Paul, who said, one day you should come and work with me and come up in my mezzanine and retire. Well, I'm not actually retired, but now our relationship is flourishing again here, and Paul is doing excellent collision and bodywork and paintwork, and with me here I feel that we've got a very good relationship in fabrication and paint and bodywork. Since I started, of course, there are more restoration shops around. There's people restoring cars, doing cosmetic restorations, shops around doing normal bodywork, but I class myself more as a fabricator than a restorer. I just look at the metal. A car is made out of metal, I'll make it.
I've started in the business 18 years ago. I've been in business for about 5 years. And in general, the restorations are a little different from they were. You know, the bigger projects, people aren't fixing some of the really rough cars anymore. But we find things are pretty healthy. You know, we're getting busier.
Many classic cars are sold at auctions. But Paul Grove is concerned that beauty can be skin deep, and you can't guarantee the workmanship.
But if you buy a documented car that's been restored, chances are you can capitalize on someone else's loss. You know, if it was a documented proper restoration, it could well have costed $50,000 or so to do it, and the car may only be worth $40,000.
This recent classic car show and auction recorded its best turnout in years.
The atmosphere in the building is very positive. A lot of people have come out here with the express intention of buying a collector car, and the market is just showing signs of going on the upswing, much like real estate. Old classic cars, antique cars, collector cars in general have always followed the real estate market, and as everyone knows, in 1997 today, the real estate market is just starting to heat up, and so are the old cars. Business has just started improving, and definitely it's going to be better than it has been the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, part of the reaction today is that the baby boomer generation is kicking into gear now for collecting cars. These are cars that people in their late 40s and early 50s remember as high school kids. Possibly their father had one, or their uncle had one, or they may have even owned a used one when they were in high school or in university. And now that baby boomers are coming of age, where their children are growing up and going to university, and mortgages are bought down, people have more disposable income now to buy reflections of their youth sort of thing. So I think that's what's driving the market today.
These drivers might as well be drunk and go out and kill somebody. There's no penalty for it anyway. That's coming up later on Kenzie's Corner.
This week on Test Drive, we take a look at Infinity's flagship, the Q45. Now, the first time around, this vehicle impressed me so much, I said I'd plunk my own cash down on one. Is the second generation as good?
When the original Q debuted, it had a 4.5-litre engine, a decidedly European feel to the suspension, and a hood ornament that looked like something that should be wrestled for. The second generation represents a radical departure from that theme. First off, the engine size has been dropped to 4.1 litres. As such, there's been a marginal decrease in both torque, which tips the scales at 278 pounds-feet, and horsepower, which now rates 266 at 5,300 RPM. Neither affects the Big Q's performance to any degree. The reason is twofold. First, the torque peaks much lower down the rev range where it is readily accessible, and second, because the body weight has been reduced, the power-to-weight ratio remains pretty much as it was before. The good news is that the fuel economy has taken a large leap for the better. During the test, we averaged a commendable 25 miles per gallon, or 11.2 litres per 100 kilometres. As mentioned, performance remained top-notch, with 0 to 100 km/h times of just 7.5 seconds. The real show, however, comes between 80 and 120, where the Q scorches the gap in under 6 seconds. Impressive considering the 3,900 pounds you're trying to motivate.
There's the old loony trick once again. Now, why is this more than a cheap trick? Because it tells you a lot about the inherent qualities of the engine. If it runs like a truck at idle, you're guaranteed it's going to run like a truck throughout the operating range. On this Q45, it's silky smooth at idle, and it's that way right to redline.
The only transmission available is a 4-speed automatic. The shifts are smooth, well coordinated, and the kickdown prompt. The only thing that irks me is that the box persists in pulling away in second gear. We have a first, why not use the darn thing? To keep the Q on the straight and narrow, traction control is a standard feature. It backs off the throttle should the system detect unwanted wheel spin. Bonus points for the fact that it's not too eager to intervene and that it can be turned off. The suspension now features McPherson struts up front, a sophisticated multi-link design in back, and roll bars at both ends. The switch to front struts has shaved almost 45 pounds off the vehicle's weight without sacrificing the handling characteristics too much. Although the ride is appreciably softer than before and body roll is a little more pronounced, the Q handled the pylon test with suitable aplomb. The speed-sensitive rack and pinion steering is as predictable and as quick as before. That said, I found it a little on the light side at times. If you want a firmer ride, the touring package is worth the money, if only for the stiffer springs. Stopping power comes from a 4-wheel disc brake setup with a 4-sensor 3-channel ABS system. Drop the anchor and the Q slows quickly and in a stable manner. During the brake tests, I required just 112 feet to stop from 80 kilometers an hour. Again, impressive given the body weight.
Perhaps the weakest area in the redesigned Q45 is the trunk. Now, in the old vehicle, it was described as small. This new vehicle, it's best described as tiny because one golf bag consumes an awful lot of the usable space. The other thing, there's no split folding rear seat, nor is there a ski pass-through. The reason? Well, it's quite simple. Between here and the back seat, that's where the gas tank lives.
Elsewhere, the previous Q's function over fashion theme has been softened. There are wood inserts to complement the leather, a top-notch Bose stereo that comes with cassette and a trunk-mounted 6-pack CD, a logical set of climate controls as well as a home-link transmitter, an anti-theft device, standard sunroof and power everything.
Well, that's it for this edition of Test Drive in the Q45. Yes, Infiniti has softened it around the edges, and yes, they've removed some of the character, but it's still one of the best luxury sedans available on the market, and to answer my own question, I'd still buy one. we've noticed something very unusual with this Hyundai. If you come up to make a left-hand turn and just before you come to a standstill you accelerate, you pull away in third gear. You physically have to pull it down into second gear to get the thing to accelerate. Now under normal circumstances, no big deal, except that we almost got T-boned doing this, because if you pull away at about 7 or 8 kilometers an hour in third gear, there's no pickup. The automatic transmission should automatically, that's what automatic means, downshift to second gear. Hyundai's dealership told us this is normal. Now if it is, they've got a serious problem, so we're going to give the dealership one more kick at the can.
The name Karman is best known for the legendary Volkswagen Karman Ghia of the 50s and 60s. Since then, Karman has become one of the world's largest full-service suppliers for the automotive industry. Karman was at the Detroit Auto Show this year and received plenty of attention with its interpretation of where the sport utility market is heading.
A concept car, open view concept car. We built it in our styling studio in Germany, and it's based on a normal sport utility vehicle. And our decision for this car was not only the styling, it was more or less to get a concept base for a new roof system. And this roof system allows us to open the whole car, to have the whole freedom, to have the whole feeling of a convertible car also in case of a sport utility vehicle.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns headlamp bulb replacement. If your car was built within the last 10 model years, there's a real good chance it's got an aerodynamic composite headlamp system like the one on this vehicle. I'm not a real big fan of these because of the cost of replacing the actual lamps if and when they get broken. But I have to admit that for replacing bulbs, these things are really easy. As a matter of fact, in most cases, there's no tools required, which means that it's quite viable for you to carry a spare bulb in the car for just such an occurrence as a burned out headlight. It's a pretty easy do-it-yourself project if you've got even a minimum amount of mechanical ability. There's the size of the box. You can see that it's something easy to carry in the door pouch or glove box of your car. All that's involved is this. Take one finger and release the clip holding the wiring harness on and simultaneously pull it back. Grab a hold of the cam lock ring and turn it counterclockwise to release. Set it aside. In this case, the bulb just pulls straight out the back. On some cars, the bulb turns a quarter turn counterclockwise to release. Take your new bulb, install it carefully in the lamp housing, being careful not to touch the glass. If you do accidentally touch the glass, wipe your fingerprints off with a Kleenex. Reinstall the cam so that the bulb's locked in its proper position. Take your wiring harness and snap it home. And you've got illumination again. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Alan McPhee recently organized a classic car show in Toronto. Who best to ask about the health of the industry?
When we began to talk about this particular car show, I was amazed at the number of people who are collectors, restorers, and also the number of organizations, little companies that are full of great craftsmen doing this work. I mean, they're all over the place. It's astonishing, really. The cyclical part of it is the trendy, fashionable, what's hot, what's a good investment. That's going on all the time, but that's not really the whole industry. The industry is really the enthusiast collector. And it doesn't matter to them. I mean, we have one fellow here who has 31 Hudsons, and you know, that requires a certain amount of dedication to be that, you know, interested in Hudsons. So there are the two levels: the people who are buying, you know, like Cocoa Futures and who like to do that, but the others, the core of it, is people who are really keen.
It's a 1931 V12 Cadillac Roadster. And the car is one, when I first saw V12 Cadillacs, I fell in love with them. And there's only about, I think, 15 or 20 in existence in worldwide. So it's a reasonably rare car. So I bought it in 1969 from a Henry Dell in Oshawa. I've been sort of working on it off and on ever since. 31 V12 is the first year that General Motors put out a V12 engine, and it had about 130 horsepower, I think, at 3,400 RPM. And it has dual carbs, dual ignition, cast aluminum valve covers, automatic valves, automatic adjusters. They're a mechanical one, so you can rev them up, doesn't hurt.
Would you sell it, and what would you sell it for?
Yes, I'll sell it because I only want one car. We're going to keep the V8, and we'll sell this one. And we're asking about 225,000 Canadian, but 165,000 US. That's way down below the book value because prices are a little depressed now.
So you find the industry's a little in the dumps right now, or?
Yeah, the prices seem to be very low, and we may have trouble selling it. So, but we're trying.
Now here's a real classic, an 1898 Beeston quadricycle. Single cylinder, 2.5 horsepower, can reach a top speed of 20 miles an hour. They don't get much older than this, although Henry Ford was driving or riding his quadricycle in 1896. As for passengers, room for only one. But you know who would look real comfortable sitting up here, especially with me at the wheel? Bill Gardner.
Not really, Brad. But you know, I was just thinking that vehicle's right about your speed. You know, just to bring our viewers up to speed, this dig that Brad's given me about him driving and me being in the passenger seat goes back to about a year ago when we were driving this twin-turbo Porsche with all-wheel drive, and it was raining pretty hard. The rear tires were bald on this thing, and I got it pretty seriously sideways with Brad in the passenger seat. And he started screaming and yelling and telling me how much the rims cost and how responsible we were for crash damage and that I should never do this again. In any case, what I want to talk about is four-wheel drive sport utility vehicles, and a repair procedure that's become pretty commonplace on these vehicles as they're starting to gather mileage now. Of course, we all know how popular this type of vehicle is, and between about 60,000 and 110,000 kilometers, somewhere in that range, you're apt to have a problem with these vehicles if they're four-wheel drive, and of course the majority of them are. And that's with the front axle universal joints, the ones located right out at the wheel, the left and right front wheel. These are the ones that allow power to be transmitted to the front wheels, but allow the front wheels to turn extreme left and right. Now, the vast majority of these vehicles have what we call a single cross or single cardan universal joint at the front wheel. That's the same kind of a U-joint that's used in the drive shaft of most rear-wheel drive vehicles. Right now I've got the steering wheels turned dead straight ahead and I'm revolving this left front wheel. You'd never think there was a problem with this vehicle. It's nice and quiet in there. Here, no noise at all. Now when I turn the steering extreme left and turn this wheel, you can hear our problem. This universal joint is partially seized up, and it's in the process right now of chewing up or grinding up all the little needle bearings that are in the four caps of this universal joint. And the reason that this is happening is the fact that it didn't get greased. Now there is provision to grease this one. There's four little fittings, one in each of the caps right here, but you need a special tool to intersect that, to grease it, and it becomes sort of covered over with dust and grit, etc. And it's very hard to see that there is even a grease fitting on this thing, and I'm sure that it got overlooked when this vehicle was lubricated. Obviously it did, and this is why this failed. And all this reddish brown powder that you see around this area is the result of those needle bearings being turned into dust. And that's a dead giveaway that a universal joint is gone when you see that reddish brown powder emanating from that area. Here's our replacement U-joint. And if I pull the cap off, you can see the needle bearings that are involved. There's literally dozens of them in these caps, and they're all being held in position right now by a thin film of grease. That's what keeps them in place so that we can properly install this thing without them falling all out. And it's those needle bearings that have crunched up or ground up and turned into that reddish powder that we saw in the Jeep. If we, when we take the caps off the Jeep and dump them over, we're just going to get a little pile of dust out of there. Now, once these caps are properly installed on the U-joint in the shaft, we're going to use these clips. They're going to be driven into position on these four grooves on the caps, and that's what will retain the caps and prevent them from flying out with centrifugal force. And then once we're completely installed, we're going to take a grease gun and apply it to this grease fitting right here, this 90-degree fitting, and completely lubricate this joint. Now the joint is cross-drilled. There's a hole drilled right there that goes all the way through to the other side, and another one right here. And those two drillings intersect this hole where the grease fitting is. So when we install the grease, it goes down there through the cross, comes out here across those two grooves, and then migrates all the way down those needle bearings to completely lubricate it. Now normally I'm quite a stickler for replacing components on your vehicle with original equipment parts. That's certainly my preference in most cases. But in this particular application, this is one area where you're much better served by aftermarket parts. If you get this part from the vehicle manufacturer, you're going to get a non-greasable U-joint just like the one they put in at the factory. And eventually that thing will fail in probably pretty short order. We find in the Great Lakes area, because of all the humidity and moisture we get around here, these things only last somewhere between 60 and 100,000 kilometers typically. If you put a greasable one in, which by the way is usually available at a truck driveline or drive shaft specialty shop, there's a lot of those around, you can buy this greasable U-joint, have your mechanic install it, and if you bring your service people up to speed that the fact that there is now a grease fitting in there that needs to be lubricated, in all likelihood you'll get double the life out of this component that you got out of that factory one. So if you've got a four-wheel drive pickup or a sport utility vehicle with four-wheel drive, there's a better than even chance that you've got this style of U-joint at your front wheels. If and when they fail, think about replacing them with this style of fitting and get it regularly lubricated. You'll have much better service and enjoyment out of that vehicle. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 97.
A portion of Motoring 97 is brought to you by the Solder Seal Gunk family of automotive products, makers of Puncture Seal Gold and Liquid Wrench.
Well, now we know what the penalty for getting into a car drunk and killing two people is. 6 months suspended sentence and 75 hours of community service. That's the sentence handed out by a court in Welland, Ontario to a goof who did just that, killed two young women. The reason he didn't get a tougher penalty? Well, the police couldn't prove exactly how drunk he was. Like it matters! How dead are the two young women? They're dead stone cold in the ground. That's how dead they are, and this guy's walking. To make things worse, as he's leaving the courtroom, the guy gives the court one half of the victory salute, the famous John McEnroe symbol. I don't get it. This is the level of remorse this guy's got. He's killed two people and he's walking. At the same time in North Carolina, similar situation, drunk kills two people. The judge gives him 2 life sentences. I don't care if it's consecutive or concurrent. That guy's spending the rest of his natural-born life behind bars, and that's where he belongs. Now, the psychologists, their hearts bleeding profusely, say that harsh sentences don't act as a deterrent to others. Well, pardon me if I don't care. But they sure as heck are going to act as a deterrent to that guy, because he's going to be in North Carolina jails for the rest of his life. He's never going to kill anybody else. And that's really the point, because the same people are having the same crashes time and time again. The cops arrest them, the courts free them. When are we going to do something about this? It's about time the court system got tough and started putting these people in bars, behind bars where they belong. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, we've seen some impressive looking classical cars over the last half hour, but I think we've saved at least the most unique for last. This is a 1934 Raleigh tricycle. They made a few hundred cars back then before turning their energies to bikes and motorcycles. It's powered by a 750cc V-twin that produces a stunning 7 horsepower. Now, this is the only one in North America. When it came into the shop, it was strictly a wooden frame before Mike and Paul got their hands on it and reskinned it with 16-gauge sheet aluminum. Now, it's not finished yet, but when it is, you'll be the first to see it on a future edition of Motoring. That's it for this week. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
What is it? It's a good question. To me, it's a new standard in utility vehicles. And I think a lot of people are going to try to come up to it and have trouble.
TSN's Motoring 97 has been brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will. And Midas for new, longer-lasting performance friction carbon metallic brake pads.